Somebody said it. Right.
Yeah. All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for those who are in here into the webinar early. Um, as normal, we like to give a couple minutes for our audience to jump in, but just to make sure you're in the right place, this is Retail at the Edge, how Edge solutions support the retail paradigms of tomorrow with Cox Edge. We have two guests here on the screen that I'm going to introduce here shortly. Um, for those of you who do not know, my name is Ryan Chacon. I am from IoT For All, and I'm going to be the moderator for today's webinar. Um, and a couple housekeeping items before we kind of dive into things here. We have a poll. We are throwing a poll up into the chat that you will see here in a second on the right hand side of your screen. At some point throughout the webinar, please take a moment to answer it if you would not mind. The recording itself will be something that, or the webinar itself will be something that we are recording, and we are going to send to everybody here. So in case you have to jump off or you have any other people that might be interested in checking this out later, the webinar will be available kind of on demand once we are done. Chats and questions, same place you see the poll. Any questions, any comments, anything you want us to talk about or potentially answer during or at the end of the webinar, please feel free to throw them in throughout the conversation. And lastly, if you are with a company, please share in the chat at some point what company you're with. It's really cool to kind of see what companies are present, representatives from those companies, and so forth. So, just a few housekeeping items. Looks like we're getting more people to roll in here. So yeah, we can go ahead and jump right in. This is again Retail at the Edge: How Edge Solutions Support the Retail Paradigms of Tomorrow. I'm Ryan Chacon from IoT For All. So today, what I'd like to do, I'd like to kick it off. I'm going to introduce our guests, so they're just not sitting here, just kind of all quiet. Ron, let me pass it over to you. You want to do a quick introduction about yourself, and then we can pass it over to Sheraline.
Thank you very much, Ryan, and thanks for having us. Been following the blog and the community for several years now. Awesome job you've been doing. And
Thank you.
so, as an intro, I've been in tech for the last 2 decades, mainly in the telecom and media space. At Cox, I've been for 7 years now, and in my role today, I'm the general manager of Cox Edge, but I'm also an executive director of the new growth and development team. Um, it's a special group. You can consider it as the innovation group. I think some other partnership between the IoT community and other members of the larger group, such as Cox 2M, happened in the past. In my roles at Cox today, I lead Cox Edge as let's considering it as a CEO of a small corporate startup. Before that, I was in the technology space, basically the CTO for the innovation group, responsible to launch and develop and support all the initiatives and pilots that we created and launched. Before that, I was mainly on the tech delivery side from a software delivery perspective with Accenture, and before that, multiple years in the network space and the video space in the tech company side.
Fantastic, Sheraline.
Hey, I'm happy to be here today, Ryan. I head up a really awesome team across Cox Edge, across product, marketing, and customer success. My biggest job is to really understand the voice of the customer, and as we try to mobilize products in Cox Edge, is to always take into consideration the customer experience. My career spans a long haul at Cox, and I've also worked for a very successful fintech that's in Atlanta as well, and I'm happy to be here.
Fantastic. Before we get to the next part, I wanted to throw it back to you, Ron. If you could just do a quick high level overview of Cox Edge, kind of what your focus is, role in the space, that kind of thing would be great.
So I think an interesting aspect of Cox Edge, if you think about it, Cox Edge is the first public sort of cloud edge service provider out there. And what's unique about Cox Edge is the fact that we're leveraging our network and location assets across the country, the footprint we serve, and some of our investments, and basically enabling developers, companies, enterprises, businesses to basically move workloads in the same quick and easy way that they learned how to do it with the cloud hyperscalers, to do it in the edge. So this is in a high level, but from just stats and numbers, if we think about the hyperscaler in terms of footprint, if we think about the US, I think across the three large cloud providers, we're looking into like around 20 zones or hyperscaler location. When you think about a cable network or a telco network, we, just us as Cox, we have 250 data centers that we're leveraging in order to provide internet to our customers across the country and the video feeds. And what we've been doing at Cox Edge is basically enabling or augmenting those sites to provide compute at the last mile, one hop away from our customers, from devices and endpoints around the network.
Fantastic. Appreciate that overview. All right, so let's go ahead and get it kind of into this today. So today we're going to be talking about some of the new co-creation that is starting to happen between retailers and edge partners. So we're going to be talking through the use cases that you'll start to see happen over the next few years in retail and how those will be impacting retailers and the customer experience in general. We'll also do kind of a deep dive into the technologies behind the edge and how exactly they will make the future of retail happen. Just before we jump into the first question here that I have for our experts, just a reminder: there's a poll in the side chat window. Please feel free to fill that out. Submit or send a comment with what company you're from. We'd love to see what companies are represented here. And then if you have any questions or comments throughout, throw them in the chat as well. This format's going to be a little different than the past ones. There's really not a presentation element. It's going to be a discussion, kind of a group kind of roundtable type feel. I think you're going to get a lot of value. So let me jump into the first question that we have today for Sheraline. Um, I wanted to start off by talking a lot about customer experience in retail. It's super important, especially at the edge. So I know a lot of the work you focus on is on the customer experience side. So can you talk to us about what some of the use cases that you're seeing in the retail space are today that are kind of leading the way?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Ryan. I think the simple answer to your question is it's anything and everything. If you think about what edge technology is, to piggyback on what Ron has said earlier, right? We're designed to support high volume data use cases, and those scenarios exist at every point in the customer journey. What will happen in the future? Retailers will be able to leverage all this data to really create a curated experience for customers from the very, very early stages of researching what we want to do all the way to be able to actually purchase it. We'll be able to engage with customers in new ways. We can look at like pretty much the omni-channel approach where we have this unified experience that customers can now feel better understood by the retailers, and we can introduce those new technologies even within the stores. Think about stuff around staff analytics. We've all been to the store where we have an item, the lines are long, and we're like, okay, I might just forgo this purchase. That is a big issue for retailers today. So being able to understand busy times and where you have high volume of customers in your store and how do you staff to that is a big one. Think about computer vision to be able to optimize those customers' flows, heat mapping. I mean, it's countless, right? A big one for me, just think about what H&M is doing today with smart mirrors, right?
Mhm.
They're introducing smart technology in the store that can actually help you make recommendations as to what things you can buy. So that I would say overall, our customers are going to feel way more understood, and retailers on their part can boost experience, brand loyalty, revenue growth. So it's a win-win. I think the possibilities are countless if we all think about how we can reimagine experiences online as well as in the store.
Yeah, it's an interesting space, especially the physical retail locations, because of just how big online has become, and those experiences in person really need to kind of get to that next level to drive people to actually go to the stores. And obviously, some retail stores attract people more on a regular basis because of the products they sell, as opposed to being able to buy them. You know, you need to try something on, you need to look at it, in a mirror, kind of thing. But it's very interesting to kind of see how retail is really using technology to take that next step in creating a new customer experience to drive people into the stores and not have to rely only on kind of the online side of things.
Yeah. And just think about it. We've been inside for the last almost 2 years,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And
Right.
we've been pretty much programmed with the online approach.
Right.
When we go back to the store, which is the last frontier for retailers, how do they mirror those same online experiences in
Yeah.
the store so you have better engagement? My knee-jerk reaction to buy something is actually is well, I would say will push me through the process.
Right.
But overall, I think there's like tremendous use cases. It's pretty much how would retailers want to reimagine that experience?
Absolutely. So, Ron, let me ask you this. Someone who has a lot of experience with technology and business, why is now the time for retailers to really be focusing at the edge? And, um, y- you know, it- the time may not always seem right for some of these companies, but since this space is adjusting with new norms as we're coming out of the pandemic, kind of as we just alluded to, why is now the time that retailers need to be looking at the edge?
So I think there's two dimensions to this question: the physical retail aspect and the online, and potentially also the hybrid. And to the question that we discussed early on, right? I think there is this hybrid combination of online and physical or in-store experience. And one of our partners has a unique solution, right? Like, how do you actually leverage QR codes within the store on sort of like the displays in order to create somewhat of a hybrid display experience for consumer coming to the store? And what they did, they partnered with one of uh, some clothing and travel equipment manufacturer or merchant, and what they've done is basically tagged all the little shelving sort of signage, right, with the QR code. So if a customer is walking in the store, he likes that thing, he opens up his phone, takes a snapshot of the QR code, it opens up automatically the buy flow for that product, and basically by add to cart, it's going to message somebody who works in the store to go bring it up and basically give it to the customer after he checked out online. So
Right.
sort of there's also the hybrid aspect of everything. But I think what happened in the last 2 years, and I think you alluded to that, right? Online retail is just booming, right? We've been sent home. I don't know how much of the population, but I think a lot of the population went home. We know that, I don't know how many boxes of Amazon you get a day, but I have a household of four, and probably we have at least 4 boxes a day, and probably 18 on the weekend. So just thinking about that, right? It's become so easy and frictionless to buy online. And now, as we got accustomed and sort of our kids and younger generation been brought into this online retail because they didn't have stores for the last 2 years, how do retailers or physical retailers start bringing the consumers back to the store right after the year? Because to think about it, there's a lot of friction, right? But retail is coming back. People
Right.
do want to go out, and retail really need to figure out how to entice the shoppers to spend more time inside the retail store and the physical location. So they're really thinking about some of those experience Sheraline alluded to, right? How to make the shopping a funner experience, how to
Right.
make it engaging for consumers, how to bring something that actually online doesn't have. And I think Smart Mirror is really an awesome example of sort of how to do that. Then I think there's as you allude to the topic of edge, right? And edge is sort of like saying IoT, right?
Mhm.
It's such a broad spectrum of things, but let's focus on edge computing, or sort of what is edge computing, and then I think we're going to talk about it a little bit more in depth later on. But edge is a location, and the location potentially, if you're a retail store and physical one, the location for you is the store itself, right? And in order to power the compute needs of the store, historically and today, I think most retailers and store owners are bringing computers to the store, right? Which requires somebody to go install it, maintain it, take care of the life cycle of that compute. And now, as I mentioned, we're also the first sort of public edge cloud out there. So the capability of spinning virtual machines that are very close to where your location is, right? Providing that performance and a competitive cost that makes it cost effective to actually move those servers or IT stack that sits within the store into a more managed service mechanism. I think starting to make sense. And thinking about some of the use case Sheraline mentioned, right? Like a lot of those use cases will require lower latency. They will
Right.
require throughput. They will require a managed network and not sort of non-guaranteed sort of quality of experience that the internet might have, right? As it relates to sort of the distance from the location to the cloud and or wherever the server is to process those applications, right? Will be sitting. So I think the efficiency and the lifecycle management in a managed service cloud-like experience that is delivered from the edge from your local internet provider just
Right.
makes sense to everyone.
Absolutely. One thing I guess we should do now. I mean, you kind of started to do it, and you we could definitely bring it up later, but I think it's good to kind of start earlier on in the webinar and talk about kind of what really makes the edge the edge. Like, maybe a little bit more detail into what exactly the edge is, and if you want to dive into some of the specifics around Cox Edge's infrastructure to kind of give context to it, that'd be great.
Sounds good. Thanks, Ryan. And one second, I think I forgot to mention. So we talked about the physical retail experience, right, and the edge as it relates to the physical. But when we think about online experiences, right, and let's assume the national size retailers who run websites, right? Um, if we just think about the experience when you purchase something, there is this whole concept of time to interact, time to load, API efficiency in terms of shopping cart abandonment, and sort of the throughput of how many people can actually go through a cart at any given time, right? So I think those aspects also relevant to the retailers, right? And if we think about cloud, right, and most of them are deployed in some way in a cloud-like environment or in a co-location facility. If we just think about, there's few ways to scale the throughput of an API platform or a cart, which is put more servers in, right? Which also is a somewhat of a labor, right? Or just a sizing exercise. But eventually there's this point in time of diminishing returns. No matter how much compute you will put in the data center, if the customer is so far away, right, or there's too many people and trying to go to the same API checkout, it's just gonna hang, right, and just start creating this friction, and that friction will lead to sort of delays in the checkout, and sort of users will leave the cart and just move to another website that works faster.
Right.
So by being able to sort of move workloads and microservices down the line, bringing them closer to users, you actually combat this concept of latency, which eventually is a physical distance, speed of flight aspect,
Right.
barrier, right? That really the only way to shortcut is to get closer, right? And you can put the hyperscaler location in every metro in the country. So how do you take this concept, this full stack of cloud services, and you move them closer to users? And I think, we the internet service providers, right? We own that infrastructure. We've been operating it. We have the trucks. We have the locations. We have the network to support it. So just know how to do that. Same goes to the cell tower providers who are in that same infrastructure sort of edge dimension, right?
Absolutely.
And jump to your next
yeah.
question. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
So segueing into that, like if we think about edge, and I think the industry is sort of trying to line up on sort of what is edge, right? And I think everybody is sort of coming to realization or agreement that edge defines a location, right? And the way we sort of trying to think about it, I think State of the Edge and the Edge Alliance sort of came up with that, your edge is sort of the area or the last locate, the further location or the location closest to user or your users that you can actually control. And sort of for us, as I mentioned, and the cell tower providers and the telephone companies, the edge is that infrastructure edge. Of course, there is a device edge, which I think you're well versed in it, just given the IoT space, right? IoT devices, all of them are edge devices, right? The question is, do you want a very expensive IoT device with all the compute within it, or you want to simplify manufacturing, de-risk, and get faster time to market, and really come up with a very limited, small spec IoT device with a lot of the compute happening in the edge or the cloud, right? So depending on who's the builder, phones, cell phones are edge devices, right? It's like a power PC in everybody's hand. So, and those things create data, consume data, process data, create content, upload content. So there's a lot of things that can happen with the device edge. But again, those devices are expensive, and phones are ranging the 800 to $1,200, right? Not that cheap. So if you want to think about scale and scaling IoT and sort of smart homes and these sensors as a whole, right? Like how do you simplify that? How do you make them cheaper? So at least there's adaptation, because now it's just like a little bit slow, or because of cost, right? Cost is a barrier in some cases. So for us, this is the infrastructure edge, which is from your house. And if you think about the device edge, we also have set-top boxes in people's home, the cable receivers, we have
Right.
the modem. Those things have pieces of compute and enough compute to continue running even smaller microservices. So I think if you just think about orchestration as a whole, Kubernetes, right? You can literally take something and orchestrate it from the cloud or deploy it at the edge, the far edge, the device edge, if there is a common architecture orchestration platform that the workload can be deployed at. Beyond that, I think there is another interesting area and another location, which is sort of the internet edge. And if we think about that, it's the internet exchanges, the Akamais of the world, the CDN companies, the Equinexes, you know, great metro coverage for almost every metro around the world. Also, a lot of different services. People can co-locate equipment in them. But if we think about what they're missing that next step, which is the network and the connection, the physical connection to the consumer and the customer, right? So great area for another edge. And I think they were the first to sort of drive this due to the problem that started, I don't know, in mid 2000s, right? Online video started to gain popularity. We start seeing that 70%, like the amount of percent that the video space just captured from the total traffic is today probably between 70 to 80%. So given that, people didn't really like the buffering. People were not, engaging with the experience too much. So CDN, early 2000s, started bringing that content down closer to users. The only difference with CDNs today, or in the last 20 years, they basically support content and offline content, whether it's images, songs, videos, right? And pushing them down. There's no real solution to how you treat dynamic content. So APIs, data transfer, or data processing with the CDN. So sort of edge computing comes to support that. And of course, the cloud is sort of an edge by itself, right? Given the fact they run a lot of the internet as it's today, but sometimes it's really far from the user, the customer, or the device. So there are challenges, there are pain points that we're trying to solve, and I think the other providers are trying to solve at the same time.
Absolutely. And you mentioned a number of different kind of technologies that kind of play a role. Can you just kind of sum up what are the key technologies that are really making Edge happen these days? And if you know more of the building block side, maybe what you're using at Cox Edge and how that really will impact retail, like those different technologies. Because when we think about IoT, there's so many different moving parts to a lot of people, lots of different technologies to choose from. What are the technologies that are really helping Edge become what it is now?
Sounds good. No, yeah, absolutely good question, Ryan. Thanks. So if we think about the edge and sort of Cox Edge and sort of what are building blocks, its main three categories, if you think about it, it's locations and network, orchestration, application, and actually also the customers. So if we think about our stack, right, and before we launched, so basically Cox Edge is sort of the outcome of 3 or 4 years of us working with the community and doing a lot of customer discovery and strategy work around it. And sort of we lined up on this concept of a full stack of services. And there's a lot of other providers who are providing just the Kubernetes aspect or other areas of the stack. We thought just because locations and network assets is something we already have, how do we augment so we have a more broader proposition for developers and companies to support. So we do, as I mentioned, have 250 data centers currently that we operate our cable business out of. In addition, we partnered with another company called StackPath. It's a next-gen CDN provider, and we adopted their orchestration platform that can support CDN, security products, virtual compute, storage, serverless, and a few more services. And we use that as a building block on top of the network that we have, and we call it the orchestration platform. We also brought in a few more partners in the AI space and distributed database and more serverless capabilities to support sort of very large data streaming, data processing use cases. then we came back and we saw, okay, so we have 3 different orchestration platform, we have locations, everything is distributed, how we bring everything together. So we partnered with another company, and we developed a single pane of glass and a completely digital buy flow. So unlike other services you'll buy from an ISP, you don't need to talk to anybody in order to be able to spin workloads at the edge. We're trying to sort of replicate the customer experience that the cloud has made. So 2 minutes to check in through the form, punch in the credit card, you're in the console. You can actually launch virtual machines right there in 80 up to 80 markets, right? So I think this comprised everything. And of course, as we think about Kubernetes, right? Our orchestration platform comes already built in with a container engine that is able to sort of take workloads and simplify. So if you just need, you have a containerized application and you just want to deploy that, and it's just one, or even a few, but it's really a microservice, a unique exclusive microservice, you can just use that piece, right? And it's going to deploy it based on whatever geo sort of rules that you want or demand aspects. We also, given containerization and sort of Kubernetes are key technologies for cloud, edge, or everything we do in this land of DevOps,
right,
in new cloud, right? And there's so many flavors, right? So I think today we have 70 to 90 distributions of Kubernetes out there. So we're trying to partner. We also have an internal large IT department that builds application for Cox and supports the day-to-day operation. So of course we partnered with them. We partnered sort of with the vendors in the space. We partnered with CNCF as well, and sort of trying to bring and certify Cox Edge for many of those Kubernetes
gotcha.
Distributions. Yep.
Fantastic. So Sheraline, I want to bring it back to you for a second and talk about things from the retailer's perspective here. So we have this low latency infrastructure, and a retailer is considering and hearing that they can save, milliseconds on transactions or interactions with customers. And at the time, I guess what I'm asking is, what do milliseconds really mean for anyone listening, and then for the retailers as well? What is, it seems like such a short time period, but in reality it's very impactful and matters a great deal to the experience. Can you talk a little bit about how big milliseconds really are and why they matter in the retail environment?
Yeah, definitely, Ryan. I think Ron's already doubled down from our perspective of the customer experience and building
Right.
products and building a digital buy flow
Mhm.
that's gonna meet our customer where he is. If you think about the milliseconds, right? If we blink our eye, that's in milliseconds, and milliseconds matter, right? If you're in the retail space, milliseconds matter, especially a lot more in retail. We talked about earlier where customers are. We've been home for 2 years. We felt we've been programmed to be an online shopper, fast performance on our websites as much as we can. Think about it from the perspective of how are we going to meet the customer expectations today, where they're looking for high performance, high engagement, and speed. So when we
Mhm.
say milliseconds matter, I can give a quick example. I love Amazon. I order them pretty much 90% similar to Ron. I have pretty much packages every day, right? 1 second of load lag for Amazon could mean potentially $1.6 billion in sales
Mhm.
per year, right? Think about what Walmart is doing, right? Walmart is really trying to compete in that online in-store space. Every second of improvement that Walmart makes in terms of their website performance, that increases conversion by 2%. So milliseconds matter. It seems small, like blinking your eye, but if we aggregate those things, it could be potentially tremendous amount of revenue for the
Right.
for the typical retailer, right? So a classic example, I've gone through it, you've gone through it, Ron potentially has gone through it too. I'm online, I'm making a hyper emotional purchase. I'm trying to get rid of my online cart. I'm trying to process my online carts, and then there's a lag. And I
Mhm.
try a few times and there's a lag. And I walk away. That time that I've walked away, it increases my probability that my knee-jerk reaction will never get converted. Retailers need to be able to capitalize on the points where I am ready to buy and there's no performance issues. And that's where the milliseconds counts, because aggregated, if we think about abandoned carts, what happens to a retailer as he's trying to optimize his online presence as well as try to get some higher engagement of me from me in the store. So that's how we think about milliseconds.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, think about the abandoned cart aspect of it. I mean, as a consumer myself, you abandon a cart because of lag, because of an issue, and then you get hounded by emails saying, "Hey, you left your cart, come back to it." But in reality, anything that happens to delay the buying process gives you more time to talk yourself potentially out of the need for whatever you're buying. And like you mentioned, you're very unlikely to come back to buy it. So adding any type of friction, even unintentional friction, um, causes loss of sales, which, as you just you gave the number with Amazon, billions of dollars a year. Into what we'd be like, well, it's only a second. We would wait a second, but in reality, if you go and do this, I guarantee you, most of us out there have left something because of a couple seconds of delay, which is kind of crazy to think about, but we do it because we're so accustomed to not having to deal with that.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting kind of
Yeah.
way to look at it.
Yeah. And none of us want to wait.
No, we don't. I mean, that's why we buy online, right? We're trying to be efficient and quick and get things done. And if it takes more time to do it, less likely we are to complete it. So, and that's just with anything. That's just not just with retail. That's with a lot of the
Yeah.
stuff that we do online, right?
Definitely, definitely.
So let me also ask, Ron, I'll pitch this back to you. But so we talked about the latency side of things. What about downtime? How does Edge kind of address resiliency in retail?
Oh, no, that's a good question. And I think, yeah, we talk about latency, but I think resiliency overall, right? If we just think about what happened in the last few months, right, since the earlier of the year, there's like some mega outages by AWS, GCP, or whenever somebody refresh a DNS record somewhere and the whole internet breaks, right? If you think about the edge and the fact that, you know, our edge will support that metro area, right? Our edge sits in the cable data centers where all the internet is coming from the houses and going out to the worldwide web, right? So if we think about it, right, like that network that ISP have to support is regulated by the government. It has all sorts of things in place, balances and checks in order to make sure that it's always on as much as possible, right? And yes, internet does go off from time to time due to all sorts of things. But if you think about it, right, if you already don't have internet, I think that specific application is the least of your worries. Usually, what happens, you have internet, but the service is down. So having sort of your critical applications deployed at the edge or even in the localized edge, sort of like some companies are building now, disconnected solutions, and we do support those things too, right? We can deploy it in a shopping mall or in a venue or in the store itself. So you can create those tiers, right? But that last mile location is usually always on as much as possible, and that automatically gives you this resiliency versus the cloud. I think a couple of other technology that we included in our solution is the global distributed database capability, which basically enables you to change your data structure, right? And localized data can be stored, processed in that same edge, right? But can be aggregated and can be shared at the same time in almost real time with all other locations. So other, the headquarters or some other branch can actually access the same data at the same speed as it was in the other location across the country. Also, the fact that Edge is distributed infrastructure, so it's a lot of edges in many, many places. So Cox Edge is a lot of data centers, right? Just organizing your workloads across multiple edges, right, creates this wider surface of attack, right? So assuming hackers or bad actors trying to take you out, right? Okay, so there's many edges, right? When there's a one singular centralized database, right? You take down the database, you take out everything. So it slows down. Maybe it's not bulletproof, but at least it creates that friction to the bad actor to sort of slow down sort of the impact of the attack. And I think that's very valuable when you think about smart buildings.
Right.
And if a smart building network or the application provider gets attacked, right, like there's elevator, there's people lives at risk, right? How do you make sure it's happening, but in a cost-effective way and not deploying servers right there in the building, right? So I think last mile edge makes sense. disconnected. Some compute within the building support that capability. Also, our partnership with StackPath enabled us to bring, DDoS capabilities, WAF capabilities. So having everything right in the same single pane of glass, everything sort of interconnected and not segregated services across sort of a cloud console,
Right.
like some other cloud providers, just makes life easier for developer to actually, when they're already building and setting up their environment in a few clicks, to actually give a 360 around the security, the CDN, sort of the Anycast like network, optimizing
Sure.
traffic, and sort of making everything more secure.
Absolutely. I think the resiliency aspect is something that we don't talk a lot about in content out there in general. And I think it's super important, especially with IoT and the different technologies that are enabling use cases. And like you said, with a smart building, it's not just one potential use case that is affected by this. It could be many use cases. And that's the beauty of IoT, of how the technologies kind of build on each other and grow and provide more value across an entire business, entire location, you name it. And that resiliency aspect is super important, because when that one thing goes down, like you said, it's not just one thing; it's multiple things, and something that people should really be focusing on and stressing when they're deploying any type of solution like this.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Sheraline, I want to draw back to you. At the beginning, we were talking a little bit about use cases, and there were a couple use cases you mentioned that I'd love to kind of dive into a bit more on the customer experience side. You mentioned virtual dressing rooms and a few others. Could you just talk a little bit more about the use cases themselves in more detail, what they are, how they work? I always find it valuable for our audience to kind of hear both sides, the tech and the customer or the user side, but this allows us to now bring it kind of full circle by talking about what the actual use case, like a virtual dressing room, actually is for everyone listening.
Yeah, that's a really good segue into the next question, right? So, honestly, what the edge can do for retailers, it can really introduce really, really immersive experiences for stores, right?
Hmm.
Think about beauty apparel. Think about the glasses that you have, right? Like, I'm at home, I'm looking at some new sunglasses. I'm saying, oh, these are pretty cool. I don't want to go to the store, right?
Right.
I've been home for so long that the desire to go to the store is very, very limited for me. I can do virtual try on where I can model these glasses or a pretty much a variety of them using an at home app, right? That's a real thing. I order my glasses online and I do a virtual try on and I pick the ones that I like. And if I don't like them, there's a probability I may return them, right?
Hmm.
On the other side, like I'm a big Target shopper. So sometimes I want the thing right now and Amazon can give it to me right now. So
Sure.
this idea of, hey, I can go online, I could potentially see where if it's in stock in my neighborhood Target. I can turn around and know exactly what store is in, exactly what aisle it's in, and I can pretty much take my online experience and move it over to the store. And that experience from that online, that seamless experience we've been talking about, and meeting the customer where he is pretty much what we're focused on. So I am a big supporter of where retail can go because I am a consumer of a majority of the new experiences that are
Right.
out there.
So then let me ask you this: for retailers out there listening, or companies that are listening to this webinar that work with retailers, what should retailers do now, or what should those companies do now? Kind of what's the next move to adopt? How they go about it? What are the steps?
I would say a big thing is we know what we have at Cox Edge. The retailers know what's problems they're trying to solve or what experiences they're trying to create.
Hmm.
That we can go back to the concept you brought up earlier about co-creating. How can we
Sure.
co-create together, right?
Yeah.
We have the infrastructure to help. They know what they want to build, and we can pretty much design experiences that we haven't even thought about. Like, what does the future look like for us? Tech is changing, the world is
Right.
changing, needs are changing, speed is changing. What can we co-create together to be able to bring a completely new solution out there? Look at what H&M has just done. Virtual dressing rooms, right? That's huge, right? That takes my experience in the store of online now into the store where it can be a different type of immersive experience. So
Right.
I would say if you're thinking about a big catch right now, what can we do together to continue to drive technology and the experience closer and closer to what customers want and where they are today?
Absolutely. And I know one of the things you wanted to kind of shout out to the audience before we end this in about 20 minutes or so is the Cox Edge platform and kind of a promotion attached to that. So I think it's probably a good fit now that we're talking about next steps to kind of mention that. And I know that the promo, which the Cox Edge was a new offering from Cox Communication in general, low latency, full stack edge cloud kind of is what this is. But the promo itself is if you're looking to run light workloads for a year, it's free. Or if you want to try 60-day trial with up to $450 in service credits, you can go to portal.coxedge.com/register. We'll throw it up here on the screen in a second for you to be able to kind of learn more about the platform, how everything works. Ron, anything there you wanted to kind of throw in and add just to make sure I'm not missing anything?
No, I think those are our generic online offers, but definitely we're trying to focus on early stage startups and startups in a growth stage. So similar programs. So you'll see from the big cloud guys, we have similar programs as well, but they require some discussions with our customer success team, sort of to onboard to the program. So we can be competitive with those offers. I know. The cloud, the hyperscalers are throwing a lot of dollars into sort of the pot, and we understand that coming in with a new technology and new infrastructure play will require similar things. So feel free to reach out, and we'll work with everyone.
Fantastic. So now what I wanted to do is, because we have just under 20 minutes left, I wanted to pivot to the questions that have come in so far from our audience and dive into those. And then we will be able to wrap up here in a little bit. The first question from Ahmad is, he is from Experience Group. That's the company he's with. Is the impact of the edge more significant for top line or bottom line? And is there an easy way to quantify the impact, like the Amazon example?
So I think, Ahmed, great question, by the way, and not that easy to answer right here, but I'll try to tackle it. So I think from a top line, right, I think the example from Amazon, and there's a limited amount of stats like that, but I think from a customer experience and online sort of retail buy flow optimization, there's a lot of research around that, and most of the work to date has been done on how to update sort of the stack for the websites, right? And how to create those platforms or make sure that the APIs are optimized and can scale correctly, just to save a little bit more time as consumers are going through a cart or trying to load a catalog and areas like that. So I think those are probably the easier one to find online. And some of the examples we pulled from Forbes, that a few articles, but Google made a lot of work around as they continue to develop Chrome, right, and Chromium project. They come up with a lot of concepts around sort of making web just in the browser work faster. But then the bottom line, right, that's an interesting question. And I think it's an interesting story, right, because I partnered with the Cox2M guys, who's been working with leverage around the sensors in the Mannheim lots. And what we try to assess is how much money we can save by moving into a distributed database, sort of as an versus a Firebase on Google, right? And I think as we did the math, we saw almost somewhere between 70 to 80% reduction in cloud cost. I did another assessment comparing sort of leveraging that data processing tool in terms of to be a data collector and sort of potentially enable insights and sort of actions from the data that's being streamed in real time versus a platform by the name Splunk. And we, again, saw probably 50 to 70% reduction in cost to operate a managed platform. So just thinking about cloud, right, and the way the hyperscaler work and how databases are being sold today, if you have a centralized database and you have an API, or your service is being driven through APIs and a web application, right? Any modern web application will have those, right? Those queries, in order to run, they need to run the query on 5 to 10% of the database size, right? So direct correlation, your database is bigger, the query is slower, or the query needs to run and process more data as time goes by, right? And if we think about this sort of equation, right, you'll eventually always pay more as you scale the product, because that centralized database will just keep on growing, right? So ways to combat that would be optimize your queries, right? So, you need to invest in developer time, or break or re-architect, or I don't know, modernize your sort of data structure, right? And leverage this ability to collect and process data at the edges, right? Save what's needed, send it back to the centralized cloud, right? For archiving and other usage reporting in the future. But probably there's a long tail, like the 80-20 rule in terms of data coming from IoT devices or just from the edge.
Yep.
You probably don't need 80% of it, right? So if you cut the 80%, right, you already save a lot of money from sort of running your business. So I think the TCO aspect of Edge is a great value point for chief technology officers and chief information officers, and of course, chief financial officer,
Absolutely.
right? And I think another interesting way to save a few more dollars here, right? If we think about what's happening and what we started seeing from sort of reports around the cloud and cloud spend, we see a lot of, there's the database and processing data as a big item. And then we see also transport and sort of pulling data out from the cloud, right? And those becomes probably 50% of sort of your cloud spend, right?
Right.
Because we own the network assets and we sort of deploy that equipment at the edge, right? There's no need anymore with Cox Edge to like actually pay for egress traffic, because it goes in and it goes out in the same network that's already there.
Right.
So there's no third party we need to pay, sort of like the cloud providers will do, right? Because they pay for that.
Absolutely. Sheraline, anything from your end you wanted to add?
I would say let's not only focus on the top line and bottom line from a cost perspective, right? Let's not lose account of what drives revenue. And what drives revenue is not the cost that we'll just save from transport costs or egress costs, right? What's going to drive revenue is those reimagined experiences for customer, that customer loyalty, that continued retaining of your customers. And then what we'll see is that moving to the edge, you will see those cost reductions, but you will also see your experiences change in a way that you're going to meet your customers in a different place where they want to be. And that essentially is going to have a revenue growth perspective.
Yep.
So let's not focus on one side of the equation. Let's think about both angles of it, right?
Absolutely. And as a follow question, I might have had one. Is talk when you are working with customers, who and putting content out and talking to people, who is your main audience at the retailers? Is it the customer experience department? Is it IT? Is there someone else, a different kind of area or role that you all focus on when you're engaging with companies or kind of targeting companies?
Yeah. So definitely when it comes to retail and sort of online experience, the need and the intent will be from sort of the business sides, right? As they own sort of the end-to-end and the performance for the platform, or sort of the e-commerce platform. I think developers are important as well, because they are the ones to build or potentially recommend for the architecture. So it's a two-pronged approach, right? You need to understand the need, the pain points, and then work with the developers on an awareness and sort of education around those technologies and how to consume them and how to actually leverage them in the right way.
Absolutely. Gerald, anything on your end?
Yeah, it's pretty much what Ron has said, right? We talk to both the business and IT, right? The business has a problem it wants to solve, and IT is the one who's been equipped with trying to figure out what's the best way to solve that problem. So then if you think about going back to the idea of co-creating, so Cox Edge will co-create with retailers, but let's not lose track of the fact that that retailer also has to think about the business aspect and what is the technology that he needs to be able to enable those new experiences or solve his problems. So it's a team sport.
Absolutely. I think we've seen that with almost all use cases, right? Like the buy-in is not just from one department. It's cross-functional. It has to be, because how much a new solution, new technology being implemented is playing a role across all different areas, all the way, up and down within an organization. So, so definitely makes a ton of sense there for sure. Let's see some of these other questions we got here. So Dylan asks, how far out on the edge do we need to go? So when we're thinking about what the edge, like where the bounds are and the limits are, sounds like how far do we go when it comes to the edge, and maybe where are we now, and does it keep going?
Oh, a very good question, and I think we're in early days of edge and edge adoption. But I think, like we mentioned earlier on, right, there is the device edge and all the way to the cloud edge. So depending on the requirement from the application and sort of the use case itself is where the edge needs to be. We right now we were sort of activating that like edge metro layer, right, which is still the last mile for us. It's still one hop from the customers. We're seeing 8 milliseconds from sort of the data center all the way to the endpoint. So now we're literally the only use case that we know of that requires more is something around, the 5G landscape and millimeter wave.
Right.
But, if there are use case to explore, like I mentioned, we can orchestrate all the way down. We can unlock lower levels of
Hmm.
latency. I think use cases are coming. I think AR will be a big driver. AR, VR, that type of stuff will be a key enabler of those things, or massive AI
Definitely.
sort of computer vision implementation deployment, such we see in China. That they just record everything, right, and
Right.
try.
Right.
So I don't think we're there yet, but definitely,
Fantastic. And one thing I guess we can add on, it's so you mentioned talking about use cases, and Sheraline, this may be more directed at you, but Daisy asks, are there proven use cases that could inform kind of their approach? So is there a place that, I mean, we talked about use cases obviously throughout the webinar, but is there a place they can go to maybe learn more about use cases, see case studies, actual deployments, just to kind of maybe find something that resonates and syncs well with them to put it all together to kind of know what they should be looking for?
Yeah. Well, I think everything's a little different, right? Are there proven use cases out there? Absolutely, yes. But every retailer's problems are going to be different. So I
Mm.
think it takes a conversation, a co creation conversation as to what the possibilities look like. And then we can dig a little deeper. But if we look for like a one size fit all, I don't think that's going to be the best approach for anyone.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Um, Last question we have here so far is from Caleb. Says, seems like some of the benefits, lower cost end user experience, come at the expense of higher complexity, depending where you put deciding where to put workloads and how to balance. How do you think about managing that?
So that's a really good question, Colin. So one unique aspect of our edge that stems sort of from our investment and partnership with StackPath, and them stemming and coming from the CDA and content delivery space, is the concept of anycast addresses. So unlike load balancer, which is already another thing we can support, when you spin edge devices or edge virtual machines or any workloads on our platform, you get one address assigned to it. We call it the Anycast address. And basically, every user who will actually going to try and go to this address will be automatically routed to the lowest latency machine possible. In
Mm.
addition to that, you can layer off sorts of rule that workloads do not start and do not consume any compute and do not generate any cost, right, if there is no request to that specific area, right? So basically you can really, instead of the cloud architecture, you will deploy today the Kubernetes sort of environment that you need for sort
Right.
of hypothesis and how you will look in a year from now, or with that growth scale, right? So it's standing there potentially running with no workloads or no load that justifies the cost. And Anycast and sort of the ability to really dynamically move workloads or actually shut them down and restart them based on this latency requirement and sort of
Mhm.
where our consumers are coming from, enabled sort of saving. From a complexity perspective, I think it will be great if people can just, go on Cox Edge and just look at it, because I know we've all been working with AWS, and I'll tell you my journey. I started getting involved with cloud and mainly AWS and Azure, just because I worked for Accenture and they were big partners of ours, right? And for years I was really like, I didn't like the Google the GCP cloud. I didn't like the UI. It was
Right.
maybe there was friction for me there as a user, right, and a developer. So as we're building sort of Cox Edge, we sort of took the best of everything, right, and tried to really simplify the workloads. One nuance, for example, if today you want to spin off 2, 3 VMs on AWS, right, you will need to go to your console. You'll need to first choose a region, spin off a virtual machine on that region, and then choose another region. And with this little text on the right bottom top of the corner of the browser, it's really hard to even know which region you are at any given time. And then you sort of need to move screens and screens.
Sure.
With Cox Edge, once you go, we think about it more from our workloads versus from location, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you say, I want a virtual machine. This is going to be the spec of the virtual machine. Then you basically have a list of all the locations, and all you need is to check mark. The minute you check mark 5, 6, 7, 1, click next, it's going to spin all over there. So it really makes, deploying workloads way more efficient and simpler. Yep. And one thing I did internally, so at Cox, most of our workloads are running on private cloud platforms, VMware, the Kubernetes, and whatnot. And at some point, I just gave, Cox Edge to the DevOps engineers, and my question to them was, if you had a platform like that instead of the OpenStack or whatever you guys have there, tell me how it's going to impact your velocity, right? And after everything comes in, like, it's so easy to work with it and so fast that it's gonna improve my velocity for just like deploying workloads, helping my internal developers by 9x. So I think there is something there, right? Awareness, people learning, engaging will help with everything. And we actually just launched Terraform to enable easier migration and infrastructure as a code. We're developing scripts and we're posting them out. So we have a lot of sort of thought use cases and sort of snippets of code and demos that people can leverage.
Fantastic. I know we only have 3 minutes here. I wanted to get to one more question, but I wanted to make sure we did not forget about the poll. So the poll question we had was, what percentage of retailers are currently planning on expanding their multi-channel strategy? The options were 25%, 79%, 41%, and 15%. The results from the poll were 12% of the people thought it was 25%, 50% said 79, 38% said 41, and 0% actually said 15. So it seems like it's obviously the demand is there. The people are understanding the value with all of this and starting to do so. I guess so we don't kind of run over time here for our listeners who want to learn more, not just the free trial, we talked about that, which is a great offering for them, but also just wanting to learn more, kind of dive in, get in contact, follow up, all that kind of stuff with what you all have going on. What's the best way for them to do that?
So I think hi@coxedge.com is our customer success catch-all email. And I don't know if you're going to share our work emails later on, but feel free to reach out directly, of course, or through customer success, and somebody will be there to pick it up and work with you all.
Fantastic. And I know just kind of going to coxedge.com is a good place as well, aside from the reach out, but to learn kind of on their own, which is great. We have 2 minutes here, and Sheraline, this may be a good question for you to kind of just jump in and answer if possible. Is from the product side of things, how do people ensure that everything is secure kind of at the edge?
How do we ensure everything is secure at the edge? How about I let Ron take this one?
Okay, sure.
More insight into this one.
Ron, we have 2 minutes. If you want to quickly answer that question.
So I think I'll flip the question a little bit. Like, how can we ensure everything is secure at the cloud? Because eventually, cloud at the edge is like sort of the same stack. If we look at the policies and terms and conditions, right? Like, the cloud was very smart introducing this concept of shared responsibility, right? You as a developer will need to figure out how to solve for your workload safety on AWS or on any hyperscaler cloud. We just, because of our engagement with StackPath and all that stuff, we're basically bringing, we have the DDoS that it's enabled automatically. We have sort of the WAF that comes with the product. So there's a lot of support from a security perspective for the web aspect of it. But Definitely, Cox has a large portfolio of other security products offering. We have
Okay.
hundreds of partners in the SASE ZTNA realm that can come and partner with us.
Fantastic.
And of course, we're working with other companies to embed endpoint protection into the VMs as a premium product to whoever is looking for a safer VM.
Absolutely. Great. Well, again, thank you both so much for your time. Anybody out there wants to learn more, you go to coxedge.com. We'll also make sure that in the material we send out there, all the free trial information is in there for that year-long free trial or the 60 days with those credits. So Sheraline and Ron, thank you so much for your time. I think this was a big success, and our audience is going to get a lot of value out of this one.
Thanks. Thank you, Ryan.
Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone, for joining.